So should the head stay really still and centered, or is it okay if it moves around a little bit during your golf swing? Well, right after this, let's talk about it. Hey, this is Steve from HitItLonger.com. I continue on my journey to hit the ball longer and straighter than I ever have before. If you share in the same sentiment, I hope you'll join me and hit like and subscribe. So to answer the question on whether or not the head, the ultimate question on whether the head should be really rigidly still, again, I would always refer to the question, is there someone somewhere in the world who's making $1 million doing it a certain way? $1 million in a year, or the equivalent if you go back 50 years to, let's say, Jack Nicklaus's era, to compare. But is somebody having great success at the highest level doing it? Well, it's probably viable. Now, whether it's optimal or if they're just succeeding despite that. So it's a great argument to get into is, you see, just because you see a champion is doing something a certain way that may look a little bit unique, it doesn't necessarily mean that they found some holy grail for all of us. It might be working just great for them, but it might actually be handicapping them slightly. Let's look at 3 ways that I've seen over the years guys on TV have moved their heads and yet still had tremendous success. Let's take a look, first of all, more of a new style that definitely goes together with the creation of a lot of power. And that is the head rising in the backswing, kind of a standing up move, and as the swing starts down, kind of a dropping of the head and kind of falling into a squat position to try to create the squat jump type of move that we know gives us a ton of power. Guys like a Bryson DeChambeau, you might even see a Rory McIlroy get a little bit taller, and definitely the head and the pelvis drop into the ground as he goes into his transition. And both of those players just hit the ball a tremendous distance. Now, the king of all long hitters right now, Kyle Berkshire, in my opinion, also does a bit of the same thing. Gets very tall in the backswing and then goes into a squat, creates his lots of push off the ground, and that helps him really turn and generate a lot of speed. So you look at guys like Bryson and Rory, of course, that means it's viable. They're making tons of money, winning tournaments, winning majors, potential Hall of Fame careers. Now, if you go back to the 70s, 80s, 90s, there was another style. There's still guys out there that do this, but I think it was a little bit more prominent back in those days, and that was the kind of the sway of the head back. You even see a bit of this in the early Tiger days, but one guy I'm thinking of in particular was Curtis Strange, who won a couple of US Opens, led the money list, Hall of Famer. So how can you argue with that career? He must have done everything he must have done had to have been super correct and optimal, right? So I don't find what he did with his head to be super optimal, but the way he worked it into his swing system and had everything else balancing it out worked really well for him. So what he would do is his head would kind of sway back this way, and it would kind of get over the right foot. Now, some players will just leave it here from the top, kind of leave it behind, and other players will actually bring their head as they go into their transition. They'll bring it right back to the way they started again, and then swing through that way. Really interesting how you can kind of branch off once the head sways to the right, how it can branch off into 2 different techniques or sub-techniques from there. So there's 3 different styles of head movement where the head is moving, more than just a little bit, that are very viable. However, you got to know what the strengths and weaknesses are of each of the 3 ideas and know what you actually do, not what you feel like you're doing. You got to film yourself from the face on. And that way, if you want to change your head action at all, you need to know that it's going to feel a little bit strange. Now, my mentor, Mike Austin, he always advocated for a fairly centered head, and a lot of people would would critique him because they think he said, you know, he meant you got to have a perfectly dead center head position, no movement at all, very rigid. But when you look at him swing, you see, oh yeah, his head is moving a little bit, turning, tilting, rising, dropping. Sure, absolutely. But what he was really advocating was simply a minimum of head movement. He wanted this bone here, the big bone that protrudes out of the base of your neck, which is your 7th cervical. He wanted you to keep that as centered as possible. So the head, therefore, the head can swivel without the C7 moving. So there could be just a little bit of head movement if you filmed yourself. But what he advocated for was this point right here. Try to keep it as center of the circle as possible. So he would think that the other 3 styles we just talked about would have been a little bit suboptimal, and that they were simply getting away with it, or what Mike would call perfecting imperfection. And why would you want to do something suboptimally when you could do it the most optimal way? Of course, Mike never won a thing. These guys have won millions of dollars. So, of course, it is a very valid argument for each of the methods. Now, I am in agreement with Mike Austin. I don't think those other 3 techniques are something that I would intentionally try to coach anyone into. And the reason is this: I believe what Mike Austin is hoping for us with the stable C7 is it simply makes the system, the swing system you might call it, just a little bit simpler to repeat over and over again. I think you have your best chance of hitting the ball in the sweet spot, and I also think you have your best chance at locating the bottom of the circle consistently, both the depth and the location in front of the ball. I think you have your best chance of getting that swing after swing, day after day, with a steadier head position and a steadier C7. For those of us who don't get to hit 5 buckets a day and play golf 6 days a week, I think simpler is better. So I'm just simply an advocate, not of perfection, because we've literally never seen anyone keep their head pretty dead still. Everybody's got a little bit of head movement, no matter how much you're advocating that you don't. So I like to tell my students my simple rule, which is just simply keep your head between your feet. That gives you a little bit of wiggle room for your head to move up, down, backwards, back into the ball again, and yet not completely wreck this C7 steady position that I think is going to make lining up the middle of the ball with the middle of the club a little bit easier for the average guy. I think those other techniques can be made to work nearly equally as well if you have a lot more practice time and a lot more balls hit over your lifetime. So you've seen all 4 of these different methods of moving the head or trying not to move the head so much. What do you think? I'd love to hear a comment from you whether or not you think some of that head movement, like the up-down Bryson DeChambeau head movement, will be optimal, or maybe the kind of the back head movement, or whichever head movement. Do you think the head should move not at all or very little, or do you think it's okay to make let's say a 3 to 6 inch shift of the head in any particular direction throughout the swing? Do you think that's perfectly viable? I'd love to hear your arguments, and maybe bring up an example of a golfer that you really like whose head moves in that manner. All right, I'm gonna go hit some more golf balls, but hey, thanks so much for watching. I'm Steve. Don't forget to head over to my website, hititlonger.com, for just a ton more videos and articles that I think are gonna help your golf game. And as usual, hey, I'll either see you in the next video or I'll see you longer and straighter down the fairway. Everybody take good care.